Hello, everyone, and welcome again to Unfound Now. I am Unfound's host, Ed Dunsel. Hope everyone has had a great 2021 because we are on the verge of the year 2022. As the title suggests, I will be talking about the disappearance of Heidi Planck today. Maybe some of you aren't surprised by that. I kind of alluded to it in the live show a little bit, and I've spoken to at least one of my assistants, Cherie, about it, and she thought it was a good idea to cover her disappearance, Heidi's disappearance, before we made it into 2022. Heidi's disappearance, I think, is fairly well known, and we'll be talking a little bit about that, or I'll be talking a little bit about that during this video. As you are watching this video, I hope you will consider becoming a subscriber to this channel. And please give this video a thumbs up. You know it helps us with the YouTube algorithms. I will be looking off to my left during the course of this video. That's where my notes are. So if you're wondering about that, I do not do all of this off the top of my head. So the general info is that she disappeared on October 17th, 2021 from downtown LA. And I will get into the specifics during the middle portion of this video where I go over the map and just a little bit of the timeline of the major events since the disappearance. Now, many of you I know have watched Unfound Now before. This monthly series has been going on since the summer of 2020. So this has to be about episode maybe 17, 18, something like that. Truthfully, I don't know. But by now, all of you who have been watching Unfound Now know that it exists for two reasons. For you new people, you'll be hearing this for the first time. Two reasons. Number one, publicity. Every disappearance out there needs more coverage by the media. Now, it's a little unique with Heidi's disappearance given that it is fairly well known. It's been covered by all the major news channels, both on TV and on the internet, but still, any publicity is good publicity regarding disappearances. And number two, education. Anybody who listens to Unfound knows how much educating people about disappearances, how important it is to me. It's the very reason that I went to a couple schools in 2021 talking to criminal justice majors about disappearances, and I will be doing that much more often in 2022. So through this series, Unfound Now, where I talk about very, very recent disappearances, I use it as a way to even educate myself and then pass that knowledge on to all of you. What do I see when I look at a disappearance? What do my assistants see when they read about disappearances, and what we talk about behind the scenes when disappearances do make it into the news. So number one, publicity, and number two, education. That is what Unfound Now is all about. So what are the educational lessons that I'll be talking about later in this video? Number one, behavior matters. Number two, the police paradox. And number three, rarely are disappearances as complex as they seem. Also, since I live in a condo building, much like the one where Heidi's dog was found, I will be explaining a little bit about what it's like to live in a building like this and kind of not know what is going on in other parts of the building. And in fact, I even went out, because this could be an element of Heidi's disappearance, I went out and did a little video of the trash chute in this building. This is a building that's 20 floors high, and so I'll talk about that a little bit later in this video to try to give you an idea of what it might have been like in that condo building in downtown LA on October 17th of 2021. So now let's go to the map, and then I will come back to delve into these three lessons a lot deeper using some of Unfound's own disappearances and episodes as examples. Okay, let's look at this map. And as you are looking at this map of what I would call the important locations for the disappearance of Heidi Planck, I will also be going over some of the more intricate details of her disappearance, some things that transpired after the day that she went missing, all the way up into kind of the present, where police are looking in a landfill up to the north of Los Angeles in Castaic, California. Something that I think they continue to do. Maybe that search is done. So I'm just going to go through these locations and once again talk about some of the other things that went on in the investigation that have gone on over the last 2+ months. So what you're looking at, the 4 important locations are West Los Angeles, where Heidi was living at the time, Downey, California, where her son was playing in the football game, the Hope and Flowers condo building right here, and then, as I've already mentioned, where this landfill is, that there was a search that started sometime back in November. So the day started with Heidi being right there in Los Angeles. You've now seen by this time some pictures, if not video, of her leaving her house with her dog, getting in her Range Rover to go to this football game. That was a Sunday, by the way. At the football game, she seemed to show some anxiety and antsy, walking around. Kind of, I guess what you could say, it seemed like she had somewhere else to be, even though she was at her son's football game. But with anything like this, we have to remember people can show outward signs of something, but internally it may be something totally different. So I'm not sure what to think of that. Of course, it helps knowing that she did have behavioral issues in the past, mental issues in the past. Maybe that was going on at the football game. We just don't know. So she's at this game and she leaves at halftime. Now, what we don't know is, was this common? Now, I will tell you, of course, I'm 51. I don't have any children, but I can tell you, going back to my sports days of the 1980s, some parents didn't show up for their children's games at all. Maybe they weren't interested. Maybe they had work to do, all sorts of different things. I can tell you that my mother would not show up at my baseball games because it made her too nervous. My dad showed up at all of them. But so we just don't know about that. Was it common for her to go to the football games and then leave at halftime? Or was it more common for her to be there the whole time? Or maybe only get there for the second half? We don't know. So that alone seems suspicious. She leaves at halftime, but maybe that's what she always did. We don't know. But she leaves, and of course, she has her dog with her at this location in Downey, and she takes the dog with her. So that would seemingly mean that she knew that once she left the game, she was not coming back. It would make sense to me if she had somewhere to go and was going to get back before the end of the game, she just would have left the dog there. Her ex-husband is there. Other people that she knew were there. And why take the dog, for example, if you're going to the grocery store or something like that? Just leave the dog there, leave, and come back. But she took the dog with her, pretty much meaning that she was not intending, I would say, to come back. So she leaves and nobody hears from her after that, at least to our knowledge. No phone information has been revealed at this point at the end of December of 2021, even though this disappearance, of course, took place way back in October. But then on October 20th, it seems that people start to realize, hey, we haven't heard from Heidi in a few days. She was supposed to meet to pick up her son from school, or there was going to be a custodial change from the ex-husband to her. She doesn't show up, and people start to get a little worried. In addition, on that day is when it's all figured out that her dog that was with her on October 17th, we then found out, everybody found out that this dog was actually found in the Hope and Flowers building in this high-rise condo building, much like I live in, and I'll go through that later. That dog is found, and right around that time, seemingly kind of some synchronicity going on, right around the time that everybody figures out they hadn't heard from Heidi, is when this dog is found. There's a chip on it, and they figure out who the owner is. A call is made, and somehow the call ends up with Heidi's ex-husband, and of course it is then revealed that this dog was found on the 28th floor in downtown LA. And then from there, the police get involved. We now know about this video that that has been seen, although I don't know the video has technically been seen, but screenshots from the video of Heidi walking her dog, and this was only an hour after she was at this football game. So she's at this football game. She leaves at halftime. An hour later, it's not her pulling into a parking spot. She is already walking her dog in downtown LA by this condo building. So wherever she had to go, it doesn't seem like it was a pressing matter, being that an hour later she's walking her dog. I think that's how that could be interpreted. Now, you should know the distance from Downey to this condo. I have it written here in my notes. 15 miles would have taken only about 22 minutes. So let's say a half hour, she gets there parked. So maybe she went into one of these buildings or something, we don't know. Maybe the police know. But an hour later, either way, she is walking her dog. It's not clear how long she walked her dog or where she walked the dog. Do they have any other videos of her walking her dog? We don't know, even over 2 months later. And I will come back to this video a little later in the discussion. So this investigation begins, trying to figure out what all went on here. Her vehicle was eventually found, but not until 2 weeks later, a few blocks away from the Hope and Flowers building. Now, it very well may be on October 17th that her vehicle was parked in the parking garage at this condo building, but when it was eventually found, it was found a few blocks away at another parking lot for another building. Took 2 weeks to find it. I'm not sure what that means. Most of the time when people disappear with their cars, my perception of 5.5 years, over 5 years, almost 5.5 years of covering disappearances, is that usually the missing person's car is found right away, or it's not found until the missing person is found in it. There are exceptions. Maybe Eric Francis would be the best example of all examples. That's a disappearance we covered way back in 2017. But at some point before the vehicle was found on October 29th, for some reason, police showed up at Heidi's house in West LA and came in with guns drawn. Now, how do we know that guns were drawn? Maybe kicking in the door or something. I don't know how we know that. Did the neighbors see that? Was the ex-husband told about this? It's still unclear to me how we know that that was the situation. Or is that just a little bit of a flourish, a little bit of an exaggeration on somebody's reporting? We'd have to keep that in mind. It's unclear to me why police 12 days after a person would go missing that they would barge into that person's house with guns drawn. I don't know what kind of information they could have had to make them think they needed to have their guns out going inside the house. But I'm still wondering if that reporting was absolutely true. So then, at some point, they end up, to once again go through this. She lives here. The football game was there. Her car was found here. The dog was found in this condo building on the 28th floor. The car was found on November 4th. But now, in November, they started looking at a landfill up here in Castaic, California. And to my knowledge, here at the end of December, the end of 2021, to my knowledge, they have not found anything connected to Heidi's disappearance at all, whether it's her remains or anything else that might be missing of hers. Maybe her phone, maybe her purse, her ID, anything like that. Nothing has been released to the public. So I can't help but think that this search up there in Castaic has been somewhat fruitless. But I'm also, on the other hand, of the opinion that the police would not go the whole way up here to a landfill unless there was good reason to be up there. I think we all have to acknowledge that. Something that they saw, maybe a phone ping, maybe something on video, something led them to go up there. And then I'm also taking for granted that the trash from the Hope and Flower building or surrounding buildings, maybe the place where her car was eventually found, that trash, that refuse does end up there. I think that would make sense. That's the only thing logically that makes sense. There could be information that the police know that we don't. But I think that makes sense that trash from here goes up there. Now, some notes before I get to the lessons that I think can be learned so far in Heidi Planck's disappearance. We don't know anything about her cell phone information. The only thing I've read is that the phone was turned off at some point. The GPS was turned off at some point. I'm not sure what point that is. We must take for granted that police have the info and have spoken to the last people in the record. So just because we don't know it doesn't mean the police don't know it and have gone through her texts, her phone calls. Who did she talk to? Who did she text? Did she send any messages on Facebook Messenger, for example, after she left the football game in Downey? Regarding all video, besides the dog walking one, all video has surely been viewed by this time. There are surely more than one video with Heidi on it. Why police don't release these other videos, I don't know, to the public. I don't know. I just kind of went on a rant about that about a month ago regarding this new Brian Schaefer uncropped video that is now on this channel, the Unfound podcast channel, if you want to check that out. I just did a little bit of got up on my soapbox for that. I wish the police would release more video than they do for disappearances like Heidi's. In addition, another note, we must believe police have spoken or tried to speak to everybody around Heidi, including the people at her job. I'll talk about her job here in a little bit. And at this point, at the end of 2021, a month and a half after her disappearance, nobody has been charged with anything. So now let's go back to me being on screen, and I will go through some of the lessons I think we can learn by looking at Heidi's disappearance, what has gone on, and allow me to compare her disappearance to some others that are like hers that Unfound has covered over the last 5+ years. And we're back. Before I go on, I want to once again remind you to give this video a thumbs up. Please consider subscribing to the channel. Please hit that little bell button so that when videos such as this one are uploaded to the channel, you will be alerted immediately. Even when I do the Unfound live show on Wednesday nights, you will also be reminded, hey, the live show is now on. Be sure to tune in. And I do love doing those live shows on Wednesday nights. I still have no idea why more true crime hosts don't do something like that. I've been doing that live show for over 4 years. I love it. So please watch if you have the time. Also, please consider becoming a Patreon member of Unfounds at patreon.com/Unfound podcast. Become a supporter. I think you'll enjoy getting some of the perks that come with being a Patreon supporter. Or if you just want to donate through PayPal, it's paypal.me/Unfound podcast. And maybe you want to check out our website, theunfoundpodcast.com. So now let me dive a little further, get a little more in-depth regarding the 3 lessons for this particular episode of Unfound Now. Of course, looking at Heidi's disappearance and then comparing it to some of the ones we've covered on Unfound over the last 5+ years. I will start with lesson number one. Behavior matters. It's very important. Disappearances should never be looked at in a vacuum. We get very caught up in saying, this person disappeared on October 17th, 2021. This person disappeared on August 1st, 1987. This person disappeared on March 23rd, 2016. We get very caught up in those dates. And those dates are, of course, very important. Those are the last times that we believe, the police believes, whoever believes, the family believes, that that person for sure was seen. Now, we, of course, talk about a lot about sightings after the accepted disappearance date. You know, most of the time I reject those sightings. But yes, that disappearance date is very important. However, everything leading up to that date is equally important. We just can't look at that particular day. And I think what I've learned over 5+ years is that disappearances are about people. We can talk about facts, dates, times, locations, but most of the time it's about that missing person, what was going on in that person's life, and sometimes the people around them. So, with Heidi's, as has been put out there to the public in a lot of different places, Heidi had a lot of problems, a lot of mental issues. I'm not going to go through all of them, but for example, as I'm looking off of my notes here, at one point, years before she went missing, she asked someone, why did she have a C-section scar? Now, she had a son. We know that she was at his football game, but she couldn't understand why she had a cesarean section scar on the bottom of her stomach. She seemingly did not remember or realize or know or comprehend that she had a son at one time. That seems to me to be very odd. I think most people would say that's very odd. She did check herself into a facility, or somebody made her check herself into a mental facility at one time, but she wanted out after one day. She said she was being molested there. There are many stories. I'm not going to go into all of them here. But those stories, just that is enough to know that this is very important. Whether she was taking her medication or was off her medication, did she have a relapse, any of it. It's all important. And these things happened well before she went missing. Now, this is why, although we get caught up in how was she paying for her house when she was only making this so much a year? How was she able to drive this Range Rover when it doesn't seem that the money that she was making would be able to pay for it? Those are all interesting topics. But for me, I'm much more concerned about her behavior and this mental illness that she had. Why did she have it? Maybe it was brought on by a drug addiction. Let's just be honest. Maybe. Or maybe it was something genetic. Or at some point, did she have some sort of head injury? I really don't know. All that's important is that it existed. So, looking at other disappearances that we've covered on Unfound, where seemingly people also had mental issues just like Heidi had, I could bring up the disappearance of Renee Lamanna from Ocean City, New Jersey, where she ran off from her sister's house. That was back in 1994, so almost 30 years ago. She is still missing, and she essentially went missing on an island. Still missing. And she had mental issues for a very long time, very much like Heidi did. And there is no foul play suspected in her disappearance, although there might have been some sightings of her after this. I don't particularly believe in them, but her family does. Rashawn Francis, this is a disappearance we just covered this year. He went missing from Pennsylvania just a few years ago, and before he went missing, he was claiming that people in Scranton, Pennsylvania were after him. No proof of that. And there was video of him, much like Heidi, of him walking by himself late in an evening, never to be seen again, not walking in the direction of where he lived. Jennifer Casper-Ross, a young woman who went missing in Reno, Nevada, she displayed very bizarre behavior where she went missing. She showed up at her mother's work in the very early morning hours, and then she took off her shoes, ran off. People saw her leave. Multiple people saw her run off to the back of this lot, jump over a fence. She was never seen again. Some people believe she actually did make it home and maybe her husband did something to her. No proof of that. And then Sky Tosick, a young man in California who went missing, claiming that he had these two friends that he was meeting up with, and that he was going to go camping, and he had all this camping equipment. And he walked off seemingly into the mountains around Escondido, California, never to be seen again. Some people believe there might have been foul play there. I'm not sure there's any proof of that, but he was also displaying some very unusual, risky behavior before he went missing. So this is not unusual. Heidi's behavior, talking like she did, having some delusions, is not unusual in the disappearance world. So I want you to understand that. And all of that is very important when then we look at what we call the disappearance date. Now, if Heidi did not display any of this, then we might be looking at other things. What else was going on in her life with her ex-husband, with the man in her life, or anything like that. But being this seemed to be a prominent part of her life, to the point I think that's one of the reasons that she and her husband were divorced, the reason she went to this facility. I think some of these times the way she behaved scared her son. It's very important when you're looking at a disappearance. You have to go back. Once again, it may be years ago to look at issues such as this. So once again, behavior matters. You have to look at the behavior of the person in the days, weeks, months, if not years before the person goes missing. So number 2, the police paradox. And what do I mean by this? I mentioned this in the map portion of this video, that the police have surely collected more video than has been showed to the public. More phone records. We don't know anything about the phone records at all. We don't know about pings. We don't know about texts. We don't know about calls. And I think it seems likely that Heidi did contact or had a communication with at least one person after she left that football game, no matter what kind of mental state that she was in. On top of that, many people were at the game, and I'm sure the police has spoken to them. I'm sure the police have spoken to all these coworkers of Heidi's, friends, coworkers. We know that there's something suspicious with the business that she was in. I'll get to that eventually. But there is a paradox regarding this, and that is the people who have the most information, the police, probably are the people who have the least amount of experience with disappearances. Why is that? Because disappearances like Heidi's are rare. I mean, they happen. They're going to happen in a country of 330 million people. It happens quite a bit, but considering the millions of people that live here, it's just not common. Many investigators, police officers will have a 25-year career, 30-year career, 35-year career, and never come across a disappearance like Heidi's. Whereas for myself, being that all I do is disappearances, and I know many of you take an interest in disappearances and go to the Charlie Project and read about disappearances, listen to Unfound, listen to other true crime programs, watch other true crime programs on YouTube, go to NamUs, you probably have a better understanding of disappearances than the police do. So there's this paradox that the police, who have all these other things to do, they get the information, but they may not know what to do with it. This is very common. In contrast to we, the public, myself, many of you, take an interest in disappearances. If we looked at that information that the police have, we might be able to come to better, quicker conclusions than the police do. I'm a firm believer in that. And it's really just because the police don't have this experience. So moving on in this section regarding the police paradox, why does it matter? Because it causes disappearances to be unsolved for a lot longer. As I've told both classes that I've spoken to, back in October at Northwestern State University, and then in November at Nova Southeastern University. One of the main points I try to make with the students is you have to know it when you see it. When you show up and facts are given to you as a police officer by a family member, by a friend, by a coworker, as you're writing all of this stuff down, you should be able to start to go through, it's not this kind of disappearance, it's not this kind of disappearance, it may be in these different categories, and this is what I have to do. No different than when you go to the doctor and you say, hey doc, I have this cough, it's been with me for a week, what do you think it is? What is the doctor going to do? He's going to ask you a lot of questions. And so there's 1,000 possibilities of why you have this cough, and by you answering questions, the doctor can narrow it down to just a few choices. Sadly, it may be lung cancer, or it might just be you have a cold. By answering these questions that the doctor asked you, you can narrow it down. Police do not have the ability to do that anywhere right now because they just don't know what questions to ask. We have to educate them. And that's why education is so important to me. Now, there are some disappearances where there are very good examples of police kind of messing things up at the beginning because, once again, they didn't know what they were looking at the time. For example, Zoe Campos disappeared from Lubbock, Texas in 2013. They actually, I think, believed Carlos Rodriguez to the point that they actually searched Carlos Rodriguez's yard, the backyard, the house, the property, and somehow they missed the fact that there was a fresh piece of concrete in the backyard, and it wasn't until 5 years later that they figured out, oh yeah, we think Zoe is buried under there, and she was. She was deceased. Carlos has still yet to go on trial for this in Texas, but this is one way that the police kind of mucked it up because maybe they didn't understand what they were looking at the time. I think they believed Carlos at the time when there was no reason to believe Carlos at the time. Andrea Bowman, another disappearance that has been totally solved, where even Andrea's biological mother, Kathy Turkanian, when she found out about her biological daughter's disappearance 20 years after the fact, she immediately knew that Dennis Bowman killed Andrea Bowman. The police seemed to think other things. In fact, back in 1989, when Andrea went missing, they thought she actually ran away. Whereas Kathy, 20 years later, found out about the same information and right away knew that Dennis had killed her biological daughter. And that was eventually proven to be true just a few years ago. Eric Frank's disappearance that's not totally solved yet. His remains have not been found. But the police missed the fact that Eric's ex-girlfriend Kendra was taking care of a guy, Gerald Rutledge, and they never went to speak to him. Had they would have discovered Eric's car in Gerald Rutledge's garage. And that was something that was not discovered until 2020, almost 10 years after Eric went missing. Jennifer Wilkerson. It is now clear that the first investigator on her disappearance knew Jennifer. They had worked together at one time at a concert venue, coincidentally in the same city where Zoe Campos was murdered, Lubbock, Texas. Somehow the police missed that. Because the police chief very recently, within the last few years, was asked that, and he said, no, I did not realize that. And this is a disappearance that is about 15 years old. And then probably the most glaring example is Lara Bible and Ashley Freeman, where an insurance card that was found on the driveway of the Freeman residence seemingly did not cause anybody any concern until almost 20 years after the murders and then the disappearances of these two girls. The police botched that too. A botching that I don't think a person who is really, really experienced with disappearances, a mistake that surely knowledgeable people would make. So this is the police paradox. So when I look at Heidi's disappearance, I can't help but think that they've collected all this information, but do they know what to do with it? And this is why I continue to talk about there needs to be more transparency regarding this. We need to know about the phone records. We need to know about more video. Why? Because it very well may be that we, the public, are better at solving these disappearances than the police are, simply because the police don't have a lot of experience, whereas we do. Something to think about regarding Heidi's disappearance. It seems the police are certainly working on this, but I tell you, I gotta wonder if they're going in the right direction. So we now go to point number 3, and I would call it much more simply than I stated at the beginning of this video. When you're coming up with your own theory of what happened to somebody, I would avoid complexity. Lots of stories out there regarding Heidi's disappearance. How could she afford this? How could she afford that? The company that she worked for had seemingly allegedly ripped off a Native American group to the tune of millions and millions of dollars. How much did she know about that? There are a bunch of stories. There's some YouTube channel out there that the host went down there and talked to somebody, and the person told them about, wild stripper parties in this Hope and Flowers condo building, and allegedly somebody saw Heidi in the trash chute. All these people were covering something up, and it was this drug-fueled party with fentanyl and all this. I'm going to tell you, I would reject all of it. What I think I know about disappearances after 5+ years is when they are solved, the explanations are fairly straightforward. Most of the time, what we suspect, what seems the most simple explanation for a disappearance is true. Most of the time. 90-some% of the time, that is the situation. I'm telling you to avoid it. In fact, I think that sometimes the listeners of Unfound think I take some of the mystery of these disappearances when I do once in a while talk about my theories publicly. Because most of the time my theories are fairly straightforward. I stay away from kook-villain conspiracy land simply because there's no reason to go there. And I think sometimes the reasons people come up with those types of theories is just so they have something to talk about. They just want to be creative. Me, I'm more about education and looking at other disappearances that have been solved and trying to apply it to all of these disappearances that have been solved. What I see in solved disappearances, they're fairly straightforward. It's not this maze, and it's not some film noir movie from the 1940s, let's say. Some of these examples, Lola Catherine Frye. That's a disappearance I covered back in 2017. A lot of people believe that she went missing because she was going to file a lawsuit against Dow Chemicals because she had breast implants and she allegedly had gotten sick from them. And there was some conspiracy to shut her up. A lot of women have had breast implants over the last 50 years. Most of them are still missing. Most of them are still living. Most of them have not gone missing. So what was it about Lola in contrast to all these other women? You see what I'm saying? I should say that Lola's car is still missing all these years later as well. That's a disappearance that's almost 30 years old. There's no proof of any of that. What people tend to ignore with Lola's disappearance is that unfortunately, she made a lot of bad life choices, and I think she did have an addiction that much more likely caused her disappearance, whether it was foul play or not. April Pitzer, there's been the belief that maybe she went missing because she had testified in a trial in Arkansas before she went to California. No proof of that. There's no proof of that at all. Once again, April made some questionable choices in her life and was hanging around a lot of bad people in California. Brian Schaefer, a very, very well-known disappearance, a disappearance we covered in May of 2021. People bring up the smiley face killers. Could he be still in that building, the Ugly Tuna building? Could he have been buried in concrete because there was some construction going on at that time? No proof of any of it. And there are other things, once again, going back to the first lesson about behavior matters. Brian displayed a lot of odd behavior before he went missing, well before he ever ended up at the Ugly Tuna that night. Megan Lancaster from Portsmouth, Ohio. Some people believe that she was murdered because she knew something about, because she ran in these circles in Portsmouth. She was a prostitute, seemingly having sex with some of the prominent people in Portsmouth. Once again, no proof of that. Maybe, but no proof of that. Then Jesse Ross. Did something happen to him after he walked out of that hotel in Chicago 15 years ago? Once again, no proof of that. And I think in all of these situations, disappearances like these that we covered on Unfound, those types that have been solved, once again, the explanations are fairly straightforward. So when I look at Heidi's disappearance, that's kind of the way I go. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Was she silenced because she knew too much about what her business, this company she worked for, was doing? Why her? There's probably a lot of other people that work for this company. I'm sure they're not missing. Why Heidi? It doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Now, I will tell you there is one disappearance that Unfound is covered that was a surprise, and that was Crystal Morrison's. I made a mistake on that. I've learned a lot from that. I never could have believed that she would be found in the woods just a mile from where she worked, and she died due to the elements. I believe that foul play occurred in her disappearance, and we now know that that was not the situation. So those are the lessons that we need to take from looking at Heidi Planck's disappearance. Once again, behavior matters. We have to look at Heidi's demeanor, mental stability, emotional state, not just that day, but the days leading up to it. The police paradox. We have to realize that sometimes we have all this information and we can't get our hands on it. And if we had it, that information, I personally believe that Heidi's disappearance would probably be a lot more straightforward than a lot of people think. And leading us to lesson number 3, that when you're looking at any kind of disappearance, I think it's best to keep your theories simple and avoid grand conspiracies, lots of people, people being silenced because they knew too much. That is so rare that it's really not even worth considering in any disappearance. Now, like I said, I told you before I was going to talk a little bit about my experience in a condo building, and so I'm going to play this video for you right now. I made a little video of the trash chute in my building because this has been brought up in some forums out there regarding Heidi's disappearance. I'll play that video for you right now. So, and what you can see, having watched that video, is that you certainly, is there a traditional size for trash chutes? I don't know. But I could see, I don't know if I could fit into that chute as wide as it is. Probably Heidi could. Now you're saying, well, why would somebody do that? Even if she was in a very questionable state, why? How did she get into that building? How did she get up to the 28th floor? Why would she do that? Well, we have to think about a couple things. First of all, I would bring up Alyssa Lamb, an LA disappearance where she ended up in a water tower at the top of a hotel. No foul play. she was having mental issues, kind of like the mental issues that Heidi had in her life. So if Alyssa Lam can wind up in a water tower, surely if Heidi was delusional, she could have, for some reason, thought that she needed to get into this trash chute. Another example I would give you is the suicide of Kelly Nash from a few years ago. He was at home with his fiancée. He was playing video games late at night. She went to bed. She gets up in the morning. He's not there. Eventually, he is found a few miles down the road in a lake or a pond. He had taken his gun with him. He had jumped into the water and shot himself. No chance of foul play. In fact, there was even video of him walking along the road that night by himself. So if these two examples, Alyssa Lam and Kelly Nash, certainly happened and they exist, then Heidi getting into that building and going up to the 28th floor is certainly possible. And that may be the reason that the police then went up to Castaic to look in this landfill, because they might have video of her going into this trash chute, and I can see why they would want to keep that from the public for now until they actually find her in this landfill. I've entertained the idea. I don't do too much theorizing on these Unfound Nows, but I could see a situation where she's at this football game, she's having some sort of mental episode. Just for some reason, she decides to drive down to downtown LA, park her car. Once again, it's hard to connect the logical to the illogical. Maybe she's feeling suicidal. She decides, you know what, I'm going to take my dog, I'm going to go up to the top of this condo building, and I'm going to jump. Well, it very well may be that you can't do that up there, because to be able to jump off the building, you have to be in one of the condos. Now, that is not the way in my condo building, because it's open air. When you get off the elevator, it's all open air. If somebody wanted to come up to my floor, get off the elevator and jump, that person could do that. You could even go up to the 20th floor and do that. Whereas in other types of condo buildings, you can't. So maybe that's what she discovered. And instead, since she was up there, she was with her dog, she decides to go down the trash chute. I know it sounds crazy, but people do these things when they're not thinking straight. And she leaves her dog there, and that's how her dog ended up there. She goes down the chute. It's essentially like jumping off the building. 28 floors down, she crashes into the bin down there. And I can tell you, living there for 2.5 years, is that it very well could be that a body could be in this large bin at the bottom on floor 1, and nobody would know it. People just throwing their trash down the chute, it landing down there, and then one day the trash company pulls up, takes the bin out, dumps it into the truck, and a body could be in there and nobody would know. Even in a building like this building has video. This building has security. In fact, they're armed. There are security out there. You can't get in here without a pass or checking in with security. You can't do that in this building. But maybe Heidi found a way. Maybe she said she knew somebody in the building. I don't know what how secure that building is. But it's certainly conceivable. But I think that's the reason they're looking in this landfill. Not because somebody put her in that bin, but because she was by herself. She went up to that floor and left her dog there and went down the chute. I know it sounds crazy, but it's not crazy when you compare it to, for example, Alyssa Lam's disappearance. So that's all I have for the disappearance of Heidi Planck. Thank you for watching. Please give this video a thumbs up, and you will see me once again on another Unfound Now in January.